Good day. It's Kuntres Umaayan. I think we're on page, where's it, 295? We're in the middle of the Perek. Yeah. So what we're learning about, it's a deep inyan. Oh, the last thing that we learned about actually is an important issue mentioned in Chassidus in various places, and that is that the sweetness of an apple, for example, its origin in concept is in godliness, in its source. Avi or Hillel, someone, could you mute yourself? I hear some background noise. Thank you. But to say that there's actual sweetness, in other words, chesed was called chesed elyon, supernal chesed. You've heard that expression. Is chesed elyon sweet? No, chesed elyon is not sweet. You know, when you learn Kabbalah and Chassidus, there's an important rule you must understand and know from the beginning. You have to demystify everything. You cannot learn these type of subjects and think that I'm going to actually be able to grab chesed and it's going to of chesed elyon and it's going to be tasty and delicious. It doesn't work that way. In concept, it's a sweet idea, and that's what the Rashab says here. So on one hand, to say that the mesikus of an apple doesn't begin in concept in its source is wrong. Simultaneously, to say that there's actual sweetness there is also wrong. This is what the Rebbe is teaching us over here. Let's continue now. Im Hayois, 295, the last paragraph. Im Hayois ein areich elov, even though there is no, and what we learned was, one more point. The ein areich, I want you to become familiar and comfortable with these two words. Ein areich, which means no comparison, no erech, no association. Ein areich, there is no association and comparison between Atzilus and what's higher than Atzilus, even if you compare Atzilus to what's below it, the three worlds, and Asiya. You would think, Yoni, that the world of action, the world of Asiya, and by the way, we're not talking yet about the physical world, the spiritual world of action, which is the forerunner of the physical world of action, is so much more distant from Atzilus than anything else. Says the Rebbe Rashab here, quoting the Kabbalah Chassidus, that it's not that way. In its own right, if you compare Atzilus to Asiya, it's Ein Aroch. There's no comparison. But if you compare the distance, the spiritual distance, the conceptual distance, between those two realities, realms, levels, compared to Atzilus, if you compare how Atzilus is to Ein Sof, to the Creator, that's really distant. And then Atzilus to Asiya would be considered close. So what is this concept also called in Chassidus, Avi? It's called as an inyan yachasi, yachas, relative. This is the Rashab's theory of relativity. His theory of relativity is that when you look at levels and ideas of spheros and oilamos, like Hillel mentioned, Adam Kadmon, and there's all kinds of names thrown out there in Kabbalah, it's all true. But when you start comparing one to the other, you have to be careful, because it can say one idea in one place and the opposite idea about the same thing in another place. And the question is, how could that be? It's contradictory. The answer is it's not. It's yachasi, it's relative. And this is an example. So when you talk about, if we were to learn a maamar, Yoni, just about the way sweetness of the apple comes from Atzilus, if that was the focus of the maamar only, we would say, wow, what a great distance between the conceptual idea of the apple as it is in Atzilus, the concept of the apple as it's in Atzilus, to the way the concept of the apple is in Asiya. But if you take that same comparison and you ask, what is the relevance of the apple in Atzilus compared to the way that the apple is in what's it called? In Ein Sof? It's a much further distance. Or better said, Hillel, it's less mitziyut. It's less entity. It's less chashivut. It's less of an existence. In other words, the bittul. Let's say it in Hasidic terms. We're learning Chabad Hasidus. This is real Chabad Hasidus you're getting this morning. What we learned in yeshiva, which I loved. The bittul, the zero of an apple and its sweetness, as it is from the perspective of Ein Sof, is much more bittul than the way the apple is in Atzilus, the way Atzilus looks at the apple. And why is that? Because Ein Sof, Moshe, is godliness, or in this case, you could say, is godliness. And Atzilus, although it's the first of the worlds, and it comes from the word Eitzel, it's near godliness, but it's not godliness. It's near godliness. Atzilut. And when you talk about this difference, it's not a difference of degree. You hear that? It's a difference of concept. Where here, not just the physical doesn't exist, the idea doesn't exist. So you say, wait a second, but it comes from Ein Sof. It comes from godliness. It comes from God. So what do you mean doesn't exist? The answer is, it only exists the way, from God's perspective, as everything else exists. But in itself, from its perspective, it's a big zero. It's a big zero, it's nothing. And this is what the Rashab quoted. Yoser, remember these words. Yoser me'ein aroich atzilus asiya legabe atzilut is yoser ein aroich atzilus legabe or Ein Sof. Before I go further, any questions on that?
No, but it has a certain sweetness to it.
You guys are great. You know how to take a deep concept and make of it margarine, butter, and kishka. Let's go. This is why give your kids and grandkids a yeshiva education. And if you wanted to know Chassidus, a Lubavitch yeshiva education. Because these things you only get, I'm not saying only, I shouldn't say only, but you really get them in your youth, when you're a teenager and you're studying, you're immersed. I'm not saying people haven't come to deep understanding of things later on. They do, but there's still something unique about the education when we're younger. Yes, Moshe.
Yeah, you asked if we had any questions. I mean, I'll be blunt. I really, I think in theoretical terms, I would say that I get it. But Lamasa, I'm struggling to try to understand. To be blunt, I'm struggling to find on a day-to-day basis the Jew who's trying to work and raise his family and daven to a Kodesh Baruch Hu, etc. I'm struggling to find the
importance of this
on a practical level,
right?
Not on a theoretical.
Right. I did not discuss it, and it's a good question, but that's for another time and better for Fabrengen. or even the shear, and maybe we'll get to that. But I don't want to do that right now because it's going to take us away from the text, and we have to learn the text. Maybe the Rashab himself will bring it home. But your question is a very good one. What's the relevance, the practicality of knowing how Ein Aroch, the sweetness of the apple, is in this level or that level, right? See, this is what our teacher, Mashpir, Rabbi Yoel Khan, he has the gift, let it be well. He's a Knei Nahor, an older man. You know, he was able to take these concepts and break them down, showing you its relevance. And it's interesting because your question to me was my question to him always. You know, I was his nudnik at the shear, and I used to sit right across him, just like you're in front of me on the screen, right? I'll tell you a story, but at that time in the early 1980s, to record a mashpia giving a shear was a taboo. And this wasn't just, and also Rosh Hashivas, the whole world, the Litvish world and the Hasidic world, the whole idea of recording someone was not acceptable. Because, you know, who am I to be recorded? And slowly we broke it in. And now everyone wants to be recorded. The biggest Rebbe and the biggest Rosh Hashiva. Anyway, so Rabbi Yoel was teaching us deep Hasidus of the Rashab, and I remember where it was on Eastern Parkway, and in the winter, and it was hot, and the steam was blasting in the room, and we had 50, 60 Bacharim in the room. The room was jam-packed, and my seat was right in front of him. I mean, like, across him. And, you know, I had a very tight relationship with him in general, and you know, so they came to me from the Chabad Communication Center, who was at that time beginning to really tape everything and do that. And they said, we know that the Shiurim of Rabbi Yoel are incredible, one of a kind, and we want them for eternity. Would you do us a favor? In your book, you see my book? In here, right here, there's a little there's a little space in the binding, right? We're going to give you a thin mic. You, on your side, you stick it in here all the way till over here. Don't stick it out. And just put it down, and he won't realize, and we'll record him. And I did it. And I did it. Until today, there are Bachram that come over to me and they say, thank you for recording those shiurim, because they're the clearest recording of those maamarim, which are like foundational for understanding Chabad Hasidus. You know, because there were the recordings before on tapes, and you can hear half words, and it's a balagan. But these recordings, like he's speaking into a mic right in front of him, and he knew nothing about it. As far as we know, maybe he did, but I don't think so. And because of that, we have today those recordings. So why am I saying that? Because so I would sit there, and knowing that I have this recording going, I would sometimes specifically ask questions like yours, Moshe. I remind myself now, because he taught wonderful things, but it was aloof. So I said, how do we concretize this? How do we materialize it? What does it mean? And he would start again. He never got angry. He would start again explaining and try another way of explaining. So I'm saying Yasher Koyach to you, although I'm not giving you the explanation right now. Let's continue inside. Yes, Yoni, you want to say something?
Yeah, what you and Moshe are talking about, right?
Yeah.
So I didn't grow up Hasidus. I grew up, Litvish, and we went to Chaim Berlin. And in Chaim Berlin, we had the same kind of stuff in Gemara. Like, we learned Gemara. I was less than 10, 11 years old. I had no idea. A lot of the stuff seemed so impractical. My ox kicked your ox. I didn't have an ox. I had my parents had a car. I didn't know why. I mean, and I would ask a question in any way like that. It would be, oh, it's chutzpahdik. You're asking. I'm like, no, I want to know, why am I learning this? Like, So I'm saying this is,
Right, but
the question.
yeah, okay, right. And here, the conversation was about these conceptual ideas about God, existence. It's not just about an ox or about a get or about a ksuba. It's about the unity of God. Okay, let's continue. 295, last paragraph. So although there is no comparison to Hashem, nevertheless, but they have qualities in common. The Rebbe says, the Rashab says, I'll show you, there is concepts of sweetness in spiritual matters. When you learn something, Ya'avi, and you understand it, you say, so geschmack, that Yiddish word, geschmack, so delightful. Wait a minute. You took intellectual information into your brain, but it causes a sweetness and a geschmack. So that's why we see there is arivus, there's a concept of sweetness in the brain. So, Moshe, that's part of what's the difference. Before you can speak about what's the difference, you have to know what it is. So this is the first idea, top of 297. When you sing a niggin that you like, and a niggin that touches you, and you sing it to yourself, or you sing it with others, and it really touches you, you have tainug, you have pleasure. You could bask in that niggin and just not move. Why is it? Especially in Chabad niggin that we go ay 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 and ay 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 over and over and over. One of the explanations, I wrote about this in my book, Your Better Self, in the chapter under Nigunin. I explained it over there, that the idea is that when you become taken by the niggin, you hear that? Not you take the niggin. Yonason. The niggin absorbs you. And when the niggin absorbs you, so you're not there. The niggin is controlling. And the niggin is ay 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 ay, to the right, to the left. Yes, thank you. To the right, to the left, up, down, sad, lively. So the repetition of the ayayayis in the Chabad niggin melody is a sign of tainug. And you don't want to let go. You don't want to let go. And guess what? If you've really been taken by the niggin, you can't let go because it doesn't let you go. So even if you want to go intellectually, the niggin has you. And by the way, the same is true with art. I don't know if I was going to say it here. But I told you, I had in my house, I still have it right here, the picture of the Baal Shem Tov, the Hasidim in a wagon. Moshe, I'm sure you've seen, this is from Handel, right? Handel, I think, yeah. Or Zalman Kleinman, one of the Hasidic artists. The horse is going upward, pulling a chariot, a wagon with 10 Hasidim in there. And it's called from Chaslavich, which was in the Minsk area, a Litvish area, thank you very much, to the Lubavitch. And the song that they would sing is Von Chaslavich kein Lubavitch vos darf men eich Von Chaslavich kein Lubavitch vos zogt eich, which means we're going from Chaslavich. We're Lubavitchers, but we aren't in a Lubavitcher area. And we're going to our Rebbe in Lubavitch. What's going to be there? That's the song is expressing that. That's what that picture is about. People don't know this. That's it, and it's called from Chaslavich, right? So my friends, we all were together, a group of 10 of us. We were sent from Morristown, from the Rabbinical College in Morristown, New Jersey, to Los Angeles as older Bachurim Shluchim. We were the third group. Rabbi Ezer Shachar was our Rosh Hashiva. It started in 1978 or so. And we went in 1981. We were the third group. From 81 to 83, we were there 2 years. So, and then we became close, and then when each of us married, they gave the chassan, they gave this picture, and I was the first one of the 10 to marry. So I have the picture. It's very special for me. And I had it in California, Marin County, when I was at Shlichus in Marin County. So, I think I told you that Mendel Futterfass was my wife's great uncle, and he stayed over in our house with Rabbi Reichik one day. One day, they would come one day to San Francisco to raise funds for his yeshiva, not his yeshiva, but for the Bachurin Gruzinian yeshiva in Kfar Chabad, in Nachlas Har Chabad, wherever it was. Anyway, and he goes over to the wall, like he never saw this picture before, which is hard for me to believe, but he goes over to my wall, and he's standing at the wall, gazing at the picture. And I say to him, Uncle, right? I said, Uncle, what are you gazing at? Like, I didn't want to say more, like, you've never seen the picture? Like, well, you know. So he says, are there 10 people in the wagon? He's counting the people in the picture in the wagon. So I say, I never counted, and I start counting. I say, yeah. He says, good, because when this is the Baal Shem Tov, whenever he traveled, he took a minion with him. So he somehow looked at it as traveling to the Baal Shem Tov. But I remember he was totally taken by the picture. So here too, someone who appreciates a piece of art, it starts off with him appreciating the art, but if he's really a maven, the art consumes him. And it consumes him to the point where if you were to tap him on his back, he might not turn around. You know why? Because he's not there. He's in the picture, because the picture swallowed him. So you have that in art, and you have that in Negina, and you have it in Seichel. It's all the perspective. It could be, when you reach that point, it's the Tainuk. And so that's what the Rashab is saying here. We do find tainug, pleasure, in spiritual matters. Let's continue inside.
Rabbi, this is the reason. This is the reason when you're talking about the art, why the Rayat paid for my wife's grandfather to go to art school. That was the reason. Okay, wonderful. That's great. Great. Baruch Hashem. We need more from artists like Moshe and others. Let's go, and Yezeda. Let's go weiter. Geen time of 297. Geen time shall nigin shulumata madregim imenu. We learned in the beginning of Kuntres Umaayan, I remind you, that the Rebbe spoke about different levels of pleasure. The greatest level of pleasure is from seichel, intellect. The next level, he says, is nigum. V'lochein bekama yeridas v'shtal shnasa mesikas gashmi mamish. Says the Rebbe, and as this tainug, whether it be from seichel or whether it be from nigun, when it progresses downward in the spiral turn downward, called the evolution called hishtalshelus, it actually forms physical pleasure. But the pleasure begins, Yonasin, in the seichel or in the nigun. You have many levels of chokhmah. The chokhmah within the 10 emanations of Asiya, there is a yachas, there is a relativity and association between them. In other words, just as, listen to this, just as the tainug of seichel ultimate leads to a tainug gashmi, the pleasure, the intellectual pleasure, ultimate leads to a nigun pleasure, and ultimate leads to a physical pleasure, so too in the spiritual realm, from chokhmah da'atzilus, it will ultimately lead to chokhmah da'asiyah. So that's why, as much as they are ein aroch, there still is a yachas. As much as there's no comparison, in other words, in the building blocks of the DNA of these two experiences and platforms, there is a commonality. That's his point. So the practicality and application of the DNA
is very far one from the other. So you wanted something practical, Moshe. The Rosh Hashiva. On one hand, what comparison is there between a Rosh Hashiva who's totally into the Gemara and everything else with someone who's a hard businessman working every day? The answer is that the application and manifestation, from that perspective, there is no comparison. But in the structure of the DNA, even the simple person who can learn and learns, and if he were to apply himself, he can be a Talmud Chacham, that makes him have a commonality with the genius Rosh Hashiva. So let's put it this way. Would you say that Albert Einstein, the genius of geniuses, had no association with any other regular individual? And the answer is it depends. At least this is the way I see it. If you're talking about the amount of information, no question about it. But if you're talking about the DNA that he used to create his information, you and I have it as well. Hashem gave us seichel. The Alter Rebbe says in chapter 12 in Tanya in 17, Kol mish yesh moach bekot kodoi. It's a very interesting line. Whoever, he says, every person has a brain in his head, and therefore one can apply mind over matter. But wait a minute. Einstein is a great mind, but I'm a little, I don't get it. Says the Alter Rebbe, wrong. You have a brain too. Yes, the application of your brain is not used and developed as much as his, so therefore he's way beyond you, but you have something in common. I called it before the DNA, but even here, Mayach B'Kod Kodoi. If you have a Mayach B'Kod Kodoi, you can control your feelings and harness them, etc. So this Moshe is an explanation of what we're talking about here, at least a little bit. That there is, on one hand, Ein Aroch, no comparison, and at the very same time, there is a comparison. V'yagam dat Atzilus moved Tzirasiya. Rhetorical remark, although Atzilus is separate from Bria Tzirasiya, ve'eichu b'derech ishtalshel sila ve'olu. So how could you say there is the cause and effect procedure happening? Ha'inyan hu d'ishtalshelus zois eina k'ma ishtalshelus b'olam Atzilus gufa b'ha'eser sfiras shaboy. This ishtalshelus coming from Atzilus to Bria Yitzirasiya is not like the Ishtalshelus, the spiral evolution within the world itself of Atzilus. Each world has its set and operative fashion of one leading to the other. Oh, here he introduces something new for us. I don't believe we've ever learned it, or seldom. The concept called a parsa. A parsa means, you understand? You remember the word parsa? Parsa means a forhang, a curtain. A spiritual curtain. What?
Faith.
No, you're mixing up Yonism with partsuf, not partsuf. That's partsuf, parsa.
Right.
Let's look now what he says about parsa.
Parsa's like a curtain.
Yeah, a curtain. What curtains do we have in Atzilus? What's going on here? Curtains in Atzilus. Let's see what the Rashab says.
They're very sheer there.
Right. The Indian a parsa, the idea of a parsa, who k'mei moshul el seichel. If you compare a parable, an example, a moshul, to the actual content of it, the seichel, sha'amoshul dover zor me'aseichel. The mashal, compared to the actual idea, is foreign. It's zar. That's why when you're in the mashal realm, it completely hides and conceals the idea, the content. Right? Yoni, I'm using a mashal to understand something. When you're in the thrust of the mashal, Avi, the mashal hides the idea. And you needed to hide the idea because the idea itself, like Moshe said, I hear conceptually, but I don't get it. Give me a mashal. Materialize it, concretize it. So then you go and give a mashal. When you give the mashal, when you're in the mashal mode, it hides the idea that you bring it as a mashal for. Let's continue inside. Guess what? When you have a mashal, a good mashal, if it's a good mashal, it completely obscures the nimshal, the moral. You hear that? But afterwards, when you succeed in revealing the idea out of the mashal, and you see how the two go together, surely the mashal is not the idea. The seichel, the idea, before a mashal was given to it, the seichel was more pure, more refined. When I apply a mashal to understand the seichel, and then I say, oh, now I understand the seichel, let me ask you, is that seichel now as pure as it was before? No. It's been tainted by the mashal. And it needs to be tainted by the mashal. But the fact is, it's not the seichel in its purity. Simultaneously, however, is it a different seichel? No. The mashal is a mashal for this idea and not for another idea. But nevertheless, the way this idea was pre-mashal is not the same it was post-mashal. It's the very same idea that invests itself in the mashal, but it is in a different character than before. So again, that's why I used before. The DNA is the same, but the application of it is very different. So now the Rasha brings it back to the parsa, the curtain, the spiritual idea. What does it mean that there's a parsa in godliness? The curtain is hung up, kind of, metaphorically speaking, over Chochmah Atzilus, and when Chochmah of the lower world is created, it's created through a curtain. Meaning, the light of Atzilus is too heavy. It's too awesome. I can't handle it, Moshe.
Tzimtzum.
Right, but hello, Parsa is different than Tzimtzum. I don't know if I was going to say it here. It's a very good point you made. Chassidus spends a lot of pages on this. The difference between Parsa and Tzimtzum. But the idea is the same. So for now, we're going to leave it. Let's continue. And he says, the parsa, the accomplishment of the curtain is analogous, it's analogous to the seichel being expressed, Moshe, through the mashal. Avi, are you with me? Avi, I don't know if you, tell me something. Do you understand what I'm saying? I don't want to be speaking to a wall. Hello?
Well, it's a little bit complicated for me, and I can't say that I'm getting it 100%.
Okay, good.
That the parsa is the parsa like a filter?
Yes. What? Yes.
In other words, the ishtashalut is more like going from one room to another. and it's different. But the parsa is like filtering it, like sifting flour.
Right. And that's a good mashal, really, very good, because Yoni mentioned the tzimtzum. Tzimtzum is a greater obscurity. You hear that? Thicker. Parsa, I like the word sifting, sifting the flour. It's less obscure, but it's still an obscurity. It's still it's still a blockage of sorts, and it's necessary because the R would be too great. The energy would be too great, too overwhelming. The teacher, you want a mashal in Gashmis Moshe, right? A teacher must break down his information so that students understand. And so you have one level of breakdown, which is called parsa, and you have a greater level of breakdown, which is called tzimtzum. So that basically is the difference between the two. Let's continue inside. Harei hu oyer shel tulda. Now he says, this or that we have now in Bria or Yetzirah in each level, coming from Atzilus, it's what we call an oyer shel tulda. It's a derivative. It explains. V'hainu oyer shel chadish ba'olam haBria. This or is not at all the way what's not Atzilus. Avol mikol makoim, nevertheless, 299. Gamkein eina mahus v'davar acher. It's simultaneously, it's not something completely different. Shariyam shocha v'yisavos b'mchilas chochmah Atzilus ashubai v'nacher. Because it is yet, the DNA is the same. It's chochmah. So since the DNA is the same, you can't say it's something completely different. It has a different amount, a different application. Last paragraph. The Rebbe says this comparison cannot be compared when you compare Chochmah of Atzilus to higher, to the infinite, to Ein Sof. In the infinity of Hashem, there is no chokhmah whatsoever. God cannot be called chokhmah. That's wrong. You hear that? Hashem possesses every virtue, Yonason, including the virtue of chokhmah. But can you say God is chokhmah? No. That's what he says here. That's why even Chochmah of Atzilus has no comparison to the infinite God, Ein Sof. But once it's already in Atzilus, there is Chochmah, there's a sphera, there's an emanation. So therefore it becomes some kind of reality. That's why Chochmah of Bria and Chochmah of Asiya, there is no complete distance. Ella so in other words, you see, Yoni, when do we use the concept of parsa, the curtain? When you're talking about going from Chochmah, the Atzilus, to Chochmah the Bria. Because over there, to begin with, they're not so distant. So yes, there is a difference. But since the difference is still a light distance, an easier distance, all you need is a curtain, a light, sheer concealment of the energy for the next experience to take place. But on a higher level, when you compare Chochmah Atzilus to God, there it's not enough of parsa. And that's why we don't use the concept of parsa there, but we use the concept of tzimtzum. I hope that answers your question, Yoni. So tzimtzum usually is used on Atzilus compared to higher. When you talk about Atzilus and lower, you use the idea of parsa. And he says, there is an association. In Mitzvah Hashem, on Sunday we're going to learn, but on Monday hopefully we'll learn too, and then we'll learn the Kitzur, and maybe I'll try to see if I can come across some more misholim and ideas to explain this better. Try another angle so that we find it more practical. But I just want to say, we have 2 minutes left, that lots of people, when they learn such things in Hasidus, they get impatient and they put away the Sefer and they say, no, I don't want to learn this. And this is what I said before. In yeshiva, that was the time when you had the patience to deal with these things. And I could just, I can't say it in words because it's not. But when you learn this enough, it becomes very real and it becomes part of you and it's enjoyable. I remember you brought back memories of how I spent a lot of time thinking about the difference between Parsa and Tzimtzum. I remember in Morristown, and it was, I also didn't know. And I started to learn, I started to ask, and I started to think, and I started to debate until it grows on you. So, we need to do the same thing, not to give up and to know that the more we learn, the more we'll understand and see its relevance. We will see its relevance, And frankly, even if you don't see its relevance, we're learning godliness, we're learning Torah, and it's healthy. When you learn these things, it puts us elsewhere. It puts us elsewhere. So all day we're driving a car, we have to buy the groceries, got to get the kids off to school, got to deal with the closures and net tests. All these gashmis, when you take a half an hour, 45 minutes an hour, you learn to see this, and you shut down the whole world around you. It's wonderful. Even if it's only ethereal at times. And you say, well, how does that make a difference what I have to do later? The answer is you're now more refined. You're thinking about Elikus. And you think about Elikus, that's what it's all about. Which we'll talk about in Hashem Sunday morning for my Yom Miledus birthday shir. Yes, Yonason. Yeah, what'd you say, Yonason?
I just wanted to say that the same thing in yeshiva in Malachi, we spend hours with Fitzy trying to understand, and it's very that pleasant memory.
Right. Like you heard Chavre, what Yonason said? Pleasant memories, because it's, but I relate to what Moshe said earlier, and there is quite a bit out there of people that don't have the patience or interest. They say, and that's why in a way Musar is like more practical. Give me practical stuff. What are you telling me these ideas? So the Frierdiker Rebbe already wrote 2 Kuntres, and he writes over there how through the learning of Hasidus, it puts you in a different place where you become an overall higher person. Meaning, so of course I'm not dealing with cleanliness and orderliness and procrastination and impatience and anger and guilt and love. That's Musar. You don't need Chabad Hasidus for that. Learn Musar. Chabad Hasidus wants to change the entire ethos of a person's mind. And when a person's mind is changed, they're a very different person. And what was important before might not be important now, and other things will become important. Yes, Moshe.
I just want to say, Shakot, for that what you just said, I really appreciate it. I just want to say that Sunday, I'm just putting this out there. I'm just wondering, because it's going to be your birthday, maybe that's really an appropriate time to Fabring a little bit.
I'm going to do that. We're going to do that.
I understand, but I'm just wondering if for some of the chevra here, and also for yourself, I'm just on a one-off, I'm just wondering, especially if it's Sunday, maybe for us in the evening, like, let's say, I'm just throwing this out, maybe 9 o'clock in the evening here, or just whole time, that means 2 o'clock Florida time, maybe that might be like a little bit better, because maybe we could just, maybe here would be a little bit easier for us to, some of us,
I don't mind, but we tried this sukkah. So remember, we only had 2-3 people. I mean, I don't want to, not have everyone that comes every day, 4, 5, 6 people. I'm saying I can't do it twice because I have a very busy schedule. I'm pulled from all sides, so it's either.
Okay, so maybe all right. So I don't know, man. I don't know. Maybe we'll just keep the shooter then the regular time then.
I think though. I mean, other people. If it's the middle of the day and they're not working, a lot of people. So whoever wants to join, that if maybe you can send out a WhatsApp or something. It's Adolphin's 60th birthday. He's making a fabrengen. If you'd like to join, join.
Rabbi, where are you going? You going to Miami?
Yeah, to my son and daughter. Yeah.
Which neighborhood?
Hallandale, next to Hollywood.
Oh, yeah, I know where that is. Very cool. If you bump into a friend of mine, Aaron Berger, he lives there.
Okay. Sei gesund, everyone. Have a great Shabbos, and we'll see everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.